Hello, my name is Tiffany Qualls, and I am presenting on native bees, why they're important, and what we can do to protect them. I'm actually not really doing this as part of an honors project. I'm doing this through the LAEP internship, where I work with Manessa in the chemistry department. And I also had Dr. Christina Quero as an academic advisor who helped me out with this project as well. So a little bit about me and why I got so interested in bees in the first place. I have always had this childhood interest with bees and other insects. I was never really had a problem with picking them up, taking them outside. That was fine. I found them really interesting. And recently I got really into learning how to do hobby beekeeping, and I got a beekeeping mentor. And so I've been getting mentorship for a little over a year now in San Diego. And I actually learned through him that bees are not actually native to North America. So that brought me to this question is why are native bees important and what can we do to protect them? So first I want to make a distinction because native can be kind of a loose definition when it comes to these insects, these bees, and different fields, different people will kind of define it a little bit differently. And so when I talk about native bees in this presentation, I am talking about the bees that have lived here for millions of years. They've co-evolved with the fauna or the flora here. And actually 6 out of the 7 bee families can be found here in North America. The only one that is not found here is the one that is only found in Australia. And then for honeybees, they live in and originate from parts of Africa, Europe, and Asia. They actually belong to a subfamily within Apidae, which is one of those main 7 families. And in that family with the honeybees is also bumblebees and carpenter bees. So how did honeybees get here? Like many things from Europe, they came on a ship when settlers started coming. The earliest record of honeybees is from a ship manifest in 1622. These honeybees were brought for their honey and wax production and were later used for crop pollination. So, pollen robbers. Honeybees are generally subpar pollinators, especially compared to native bees. They are a little bit too neat in their habits. So they pack pollen into these little neat pellets that you can see on their back legs. And so that doesn't really give the pollen a chance to fall off and pollinate other plants as well. The big reason why they're called pollen robbers, though, is this behavior where they will actually access the nectar sometimes without even touching pollen. And they often do this by biting a hole in the base of the flower and then taking it that way. Yes, so comparatively, native bees don't tend to have these same behaviors. They're not as organized. They're usually very messy. If you've seen bees with like pollen all over them, like bumblebees, you can imagine how that's kind of just like falling off of them as they're visiting all these different flowers. So a quote that I found from a study that I reference later on in this slideshow, the approximately 1,600 species of native California bees have had a long evolutionary history with about 6,000 different kinds of native California flowering plants. Like the plants, bees are an integral part of the heritage of the state's natural resources. So this was stated by Gordon Franke as well as many others in his research paper, and it was a cooperative between UC Davis and UC Berkeley. So to kind of give you an idea of the overall numbers, there are 4,000 species of bees that are considered native to North America. Of those, 1,600 can be found here in California. So that means that 40% of all of the continent's bees call California home. So we have a lot of biodiversity here. And then, so this is the study that I was talking about earlier. So in this table on the left here is all of the ornamental plants that they had observed in California gardens that were really mainly being visited by one major bee species. They have the bee species listed here. And I did highlight some of them for just to kind of show the images. So this is yarrow, which is this first picture on the left, along with the Halictidae, which is the sweat bee. And as well as the manzanita with bombus, which is bumblebee in the middle. And then the California poppy here, again, with another bumblebee. And then the chart on the right is similar statistics, but for these flowers, they had 2 to 3 main groups. And basically what they did in this study was they observed like 7 cities in California. And these were the flowers that they found that had very specific species tied to them. The other ones that they had observed probably had many other pollinators that were visiting them. But these were like the key ones that they had noticed. And so this is again from the same study, but this is overall for all of the gardens, the most frequent pollinators that they found in the gardens. And again, this is just highlighting like which bees are in the picture. So the mining bee is up here on top, and then the digger bee is down here on the bottom. And one thing that you might notice is that these native bees kind of look like honeybees, but are really frequently, they don't look at all like them. Especially the sweat bee, which was previous, can really be mistaken for flies very often. But yeah, so this table actually lists common native species found. And I did want to point out that honeybee they do list it on here. So it kind of goes back to that, the way that people define native bees can be a little bit different. And they just put in a caveat with like the fact that it's introduced. So it's like native, it's been here for a while, but it wasn't originally here. So threats to native bees. So one of the big threats is diseases and pathogens that originate from sick honeybee colonies. So in this study here, they did a research project on the distance from a honeybee colony on a farm compared to other bees, other native bees, as well as a bumblebee colony, which bumblebees are not as prolific as honeybees. They're a little bit harder to cultivate and they don't build as big of hives, but they can be used for like small places like greenhouses, so that's why they were used in this study. So the bars on this graph, the gray is actually the colonies, the bumblebee colonies. And then the white is the wild bumblebees that they were able to catch. So one thing that I wanted to highlight here is that the closer that these populations were to the honeybee hives, the more likely they were to have more parasites and to have more diseases contracted. And also because there were both contained bumblebees in the greenhouses, but then also the wild bumblebees, obviously the white bars, those numbers are a little bit harder to define for the wild bees because it's a lot harder to, track down every single bumblebee and check for diseases. So what can we do to help protect these native bees? So the biggest impacts on the bees are really coming from like pesticides, and really the big changes are going to come from legislation and from beekeeping associations, making sure that they're keeping their hives healthy. But there are things that we as individuals can do. So a big thing is making sure to plant a variety of native flowering plants that bloom in all seasons. So if you're wondering about plants, that's actually why I included that first table with the specific relationships between like the California garden plants and the bees, to show it directly like what species you would be like serving and helping them out by planting those flowers. And then another big thing is to provide nesting resources. So most native bees are actually solitary bees, meaning they don't build hives like honeybees do. A lot of them are ground nesting bees or cavity nesting bees. So for ground nesting bees, you generally want to leave some access to bare soil, and you want to avoid excess tilling. For cavity nesting bees, you want to leave like dead wood, stems, brush piles, especially over the winter when they're hibernating. And I know that landscaping is a big thing, but just kind of leaving it in a pile and then waiting to get rid of it until it warms up in the spring is enough. And the third thing is just to avoid the use of pesticides in your garden and yards. Yeah. These were my resources. Right. Any questions?
Are there any pesticides that are bee friendly, or is it just a blanket like?
So it really, there are ones that are considered like bee friendly, but even with like usually when they say bee friendly, it's usually honeybee focused. And even in that, there are still kind of questions about whether they are still affecting honeybees, but at a longer, like more long-term effects than short-term that may not be seen. Yeah. Yep.
So you mentioned how like honeybees are harmful and that they like hoard, or what did you refer them to?
So the pollen, no, not pollen robbers, the nectar robbers, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so are they considered invasive or?
So yes, in some cases, yes, but it really depends. They can coexist. So honeybees practice something called flower loyalty. When they leave the hive, they're going on a mission to get a specific resource, either pollen or nectar, from a specific flower. So when they go out, they're not going around to different types of flowers and stuff. Like they are generalists, they can go to anyone, but like by the time they leave the hive, they know exactly what they're going for. So planting a variety helps by the honeybees are going to pick whatever is best for their hive and then leave the rest of the flowers alone for the most part, unless they really need those other resources. But then that also leaves all those other flowers more available for native bees. Yeah.
I was listening to NPR or something recently, and I was hearing about this initiative of these large scale solar farms that are going in relatively rural regions of, I think it was California, and how a lot of that space underneath is kind of not utilized efficiently, and that this specific story I was looking at, they were redoing and landscaping all of the kind of underground or the ground beneath these solar panels specifically to plant local flowers to attract bee colonies. And they've talked it up like they've had a lot of early success, and it was a promising way to kind of create some kind of scale to address this problem. Have you seen any other kind of like creative ways that industries or bigger players are focusing on this issue?
I mean, there isn't a whole lot that I've seen like legislation wise. It's kind of like the whole big push has really been like save the bees, and everyone thinks of like honeybees, but right now honeybees are more than there ever have been. Like you have honeybee breeders and you have people like keeping them and looking out for them. But you don't really have that for native bees. So those are the ones that are really like more in danger. And you can actually go to one of my main references was actually the Xerces Society, which is they are focused on conservation of invertebrates. So they're a great resource, a great website to go to. They have a big project on bumblebees, but they also have done things for like, I think clams, just like, it's really awesome.
Can I see the resource page?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one of my best friends of 15 years bought a 90-acre farm in Central Oregon, and it's a bee farm.
Mhm.
So he has completely turned it from a place where they would, house livestock and whatnot into a 100% bee farm. So he's been
Yeah.
planting all these local native plants,
Yeah, it's
and it's
awesome.
amazing to see it come along. But I know very little, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of want to pass this along to him.
Yeah,
Thanks
and
for
feel
educating
free to
me.
like give him my email as well. I love to talk about bees.
Cool. Yeah, he's a San Diegan too. So cool.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I was wondering how the whole like not living in colonies or in groups worked with native bees.
So most insects they don't live in colonies. It's actually very rare to have this. It's called eusocial, is the behavior that bees and ants and termites display, where they make a hive with a queen. So bumblebees kind of make a similar like nest, but they are going to be very much smaller, and they don't really make like honey. They only make as much food as they need for their like offspring, for their larvae. For the most part, all these other solitary bees, they will either go into they'll dig into the ground and make their own little hole, or they will kind of find a hollow stem and they will maybe you put some wax to cover, and then they'll hibernate in there. And then like in the winter, they'll come out, they'll find the opposite sex. And then there will still be bees that are nesting somewhere. So that's going to be the female bees, but the male bees are going to generally be like sleeping in flowers, which is right here, actually. It's a bumblebee sleeping in a flower. That's so cute. Because like the females make their little holes and then like have the eggs there and they're raising them, and then the males are just kind of like, I'm gonna go sleep in the flower.
I have a question about like the life of a bee. What is that time cycle? How many can they birth
So
or egg laying?
it's kind of difficult because like once you start talking about native bees, it's like a very huge clade, and then there can be differences. I know a lot more about honeybees, but I would imagine it's probably a yearly cycle, like probably right after they lay the eggs and everything. The female would probably hide that egg spot, and then probably die shortly after, honestly. For honeybees, it depends. So during the summer and like spring months when they're working really hard, the turnover rate can be like 1 to 2 weeks is the life of a worker bee. But in the winter, so they kind of also do this hibernation thing. So like the hive doesn't all die, they're just all in their box, and they kind of just vibrate their bodies and warm up the hive and keep the eggs warm as well. And because they aren't really going out, they'll actually live more like a couple months.
So, yeah. All right, thank you.